So we're going to finish off our last example in section 10.2 where we're going to be looking for our balance due at the date of maturity. All right, looking at this problem, we have a lot of information that we're being given, and notice that I have this kind of broken up into two pieces. Our first step is going to be to find our due date, and then our second step is going to be to find the balance due, and we're going to use that table that's down at the bottom. When you're working through these problems, it's going to be up to you to generate and draw out a table for your specific example, but I'll kind of talk about that as we get into that second step. All right. So use the United States rule to determine the balance due at the end on the note at the date of maturity below. So Mrs. Panic is a math teacher and she plans to attend a national conference. To pay for her airfare on November 1st, 2014, she takes out a 120-day loan for $400 at an interest rate of 12.5%. Mrs. Panic uses some birthday gift money to make a partial payment of $150 on January 5th, 2015. She makes a second partial payment of $100 on February 2nd, 2015. Determine what Mrs. Panic must pay at the due date. All right, so our first step is going to be to find our due date. And we actually did something like this back in example 5. Part C of example 5 started off with this step. All right, so to start with, we're going to look up November 1st. In our table and figure out what day that is. November 1st, right up at the top here, is day 305. Okay. Right, so then we need to figure out how to get to 120 days. Right, so let's start by looking at what's left for the days in 2014. Right, if we go from November 1st to December 31st, right, here's where we're going to do a subtraction. So we'll say here's where we're going to do a subtraction. December 31st is day 365, right, minus 305 tells us that there are 60 days left in the year for 2014. Right, then we need to figure out how many days in 2015. Right. Well, our loan is for 120 days, so we're going to take 120 days minus the 60, right, from 2014, right, that have already passed, and we get 60. So now we're going to go to our table, and we are going to look up, right, what day 60 is. And day 60, I'm going to go ahead and write it out. It is March 1st. But if we look at in our table, we see that that is that right there. So our loan is going from November 1st, the 305th day of 2014, to March 1st, the 60th day of 2015. Okay, so now we're going to find the balance due at the date of maturity. Right, so we're going to set up a table as we're going through, and your table is always going to have 4 different rows: dates, time, interest, adjusted principal. Right, when we're thinking about this for interest, remember that we're thinking about our interest formula. Interest equals principal times rate times time. And then our adjusted principal is going to be the principal plus the interest minus the payment. So that's going to be kind of the little formula that we're going to use as we're going through these problems. Right? So we've got a table down here, and then I just labeled my bottom 2 rows. Interest equals principal times rate times time, and adjusted principal means principal plus interest minus payment. All right. So to start with, we're going to start with our dates. Right? So Mrs. Panic took out the loan on November 1st. Right? And then she made a partial payment on the first one on January 5th. So we're going to put January 5th here. Right? That means that our second payment starts at January 5th and it goes to, so the date that she made her first payment to the date that she makes her second payment, which is February 2nd. And then the amount due at the date of maturity is going to go from the second payment date of February 2nd to day 120, which we already established was March 1st. Okay. All right, November 1st, in the previous part of the example above, we saw was day 305. Okay. If we look up January 5th in our table, that's just day 5. Right? It's the 5th day of the year. And then if we look up February 2nd in our table, it's day 33. Right, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go through and set up these dates. Right, and notice that our end date and start date for the second payment are the same. Our end date for the second payment and our start date for the amount of maturity is the same. If you have more than 2 payments, you're going to have more than 2 columns. Right, up at the top here, I also labeled the amount of each payment. Right, and so we also see the information about the amount of each payment that we were told in the problem. So you can set up a table. These numbers that are here, these are going to be up to you to fill in based on the details given to you in your specific problem. Right, so now we're going to start with time. So we're going to figure out the amount of time for kind of each of these different groups of payments here. Right, so our time from November 1st to January 5th. Right, so thinking about what we did in example B on the previous page, these are in different calendar years, right? So we need to figure out the total number of days elapsed in between, right? So from November 1st to the end of the year, we're going to take 365 minus 305. Which gives us 60. Right? And then once we have that 60, we're going to add the 5 days from 2015 to give us a total time of 65. Right, now when we move to the next step, we are going to be using our banker's rule as well, and we're going to be thinking about our time as, since it's in days, divided by 360. So we're going to have 65 divided by 360. Our next group is a little simpler because now we're in the same calendar year. Right? 33 minus 5 gives us 28. So our time for this one is simply 28 divided by 360. Right? And then we have, oops, that should say day 60 is March 1st, not day 120. It's 120th day of the loan, but looking up right above here, that should say day 60. Right? So 60 minus 33 is going to give us 27. So we're going to use 27 over 360 for this last value. All right, now we're going to go through, and after we kind of fill in all of the date information at the top, we're going to go through and work through each different column individually. So we can fill out all of the date and time information at the top, but now we're going to have to work through this column, and then this column, and then our final column. Okay, so for our first payment, we're told to find our interest. Our interest is going to be our principal times our rate times our time. Well, the original loan was for $400, so that's our principal. Right? The interest rate is 12%, so 0.125. And our time we just found up here was 65 over 360. We're going to multiply all of those together, and that is going to give us an interest of $9.03. So we take our original amount of the loan, the $400, times our interest rate, the 0.125, times the time that we just found in that little part up there, the 65 divided by 360, it gives us 903. All right, then the adjusted principal. I put in this little formula here. We're going to take our principal plus our interest minus our payment. So our principal was 400 plus our interest is this 903 that we just found minus our payment amount of 150. That is going to give us a total of 259.03. Right? So that is our adjusted principal. We're then going to use this adjusted principal to work through our next column. So that's why the rest of these columns have to be filled out one by one. So now for our second payment, we're going to take this adjusted principal that we just had here, this $259.03, times our interest rate, which is 0.125, times our time, which is 28 over 360. Multiply all of those together, we get $2.52. All right, our adjusted principal, we're going to use this answer again. So we always start with what we had, right? So here we started with our original principal. Both of these we're going to start with our adjusted principal. So we also have the $259.03 here, plus our interest, which is $252, minus our payment. Our second payment is $100. Right, so add and subtract, we get $161.55. Right, then this $161.55 again is what we're going to bring to our next column. So $161.55 times still our same interest rate of 12.5%. This time our time is 27 divided by 360. Multiply all of these together, we get $1.51. Then this one we start again, same number, the $161.55. We add our interest, which is $151. This case we don't have a payment to subtract because that's what we're trying to find. So there is no subtraction here. We're just going to add these two. Right? If you want to, you could put a -0 in there if you want to, or we could just leave it out. I tend to be more inclined just to leave it out. And $161.55 plus $151 is $163.06. Right? And this is going to be our final answer. So $163.06 to be paid on the due date of March 1st. Right, there's a lot of moving pieces in this table, right? There's a lot of information that we're given. So I think the table is the easiest way to organize it. Again, my recommendation, go through and take care of everything dealing with dates and time first. So find that due date, find the date and the time in between each of our different payments to begin with. Then once we do that, so all that stuff that's up above in A and all of the stuff that's in purple in here, right, then we start working through column by column. And then remember that your first number in each of these boxes that are written in red here should be the same, right? Our original principal was 400. Then we used our adjusted principal of 259.03 for this next column, and then we used our adjusted principal of 161.55 for this last column. So these problems, the balance date or balance due at date of maturity, are definitely going to be a little bit of time consuming and a little bit more complicated, obviously, than everything else that we've seen so far in this chapter. So take your time with them, draw out some tables as you're going through stuff. If you get stuck, again, always feel free to reach out to me.